To get started, we should ask some questions that may seem simple, but could be difficult to articulate if you were asked on the spot. What is music, and how is it made? How do instruments make their sounds, and what are the key differences in a performance that separate a novice from an amateur or professional? Quick side note on terminology, a song is a piece of music with lyrics, but for simplicity, I'll use it in a general sense to describe all music, including instrumentals. When you start learning to play an instrument or sing, producing a note correctly is the first thing you'll need to learn how to do. So that's where we'll start. If you're playing a piano or harp, playing a note is relatively easy. You just press on the key or pluck on the string and the note is played. If you're learning the violin or trombone, producing a nice sounding and accurate note will take more practice. Same goes for guitar or bass, which require building some finger strength to hold the string down. Instruments play notes when part of them begin to vibrate, whether that's from plucking the string of a guitar, fluttering your lips on the mouthpiece of a trumpet, or blowing air through the reed of a harmonica. Even singers are making notes by vibrating their vocal cords. When played or sung, they'll vibrate back and forth very quickly, vibrating the air that reaches your ear, allowing you to hear the note. How fast the instrument vibrates in a given time, known as the frequency, determines the note being played. In music terms, the relation of these frequencies and how they are perceived is referred to as the pitch. The higher the pitch, the higher the note. Notes are just sounds made at particular frequencies. The system we use assigns letters to those frequencies to define specific notes. These letters are A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. There are even notes between some of the letters which are marked as sharp if they are higher, or flat if they are lower. For example, F sharp is between F and G, and D flat is between C and D. This will be explained in more detail when we talk about scales. Once you reach the last note in the sequence, the letters A through G repeat. Numbers can be placed after the letter to signify what the specific pitch of that note is. So A0 is a very low note, while A4 is much higher. Middle C on the piano is C4. If these notes are defined by specific frequencies, why do different instruments, when playing the same note, sound so different? Without going into too much detail, that difference is caused by additional frequencies called overtones, and each instrument's overtones differ in volume. You don't need to know the specifics of all that right now. Pianos are soft sounding, but dark and muddy in the lower end, and bright and thin in the upper end. A steel string guitar is bright, even in the low end. Now let's look at some music notation, since this will be the easiest way to learn going forwards, and it's a great skill to develop if you want to learn other people's songs or write down your own. Here we have an empty staff. It's 5 lines, equally spaced. Notes are written on the lines, in the spaces in between, and outside the staff with additional lines where needed. As it is now, it isn't very useful at showing which notes are which. We need to know what clef is associated with it. The 4 most common clefs are the treble, bass, alto, and tenor. Notice the alto and tenor are the same symbol, just placed on the staff differently. The clef you use will depend on the instrument you play, but I'll be using the treble and bass clef for most of the examples as of the most common ones. If we put a treble clef on our staff, we can start to identify the notes. Here we have E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F. We can keep going higher by adding lines through every other note. G, A, B, C. We can also go lower in pitch by adding notes to the bottom. D, C, B, A, and so on. At some point when you get too high or too low, it can get tough to read, but this is a solution I'll show you in a later video. Here are the other 3 clefs I mentioned and the notes on their staves. See how the pattern is the same, only the notes are shifted up or down. Now you might be wondering, why do we use clefs instead of just having a standard note layout? Well, different instruments are able to play within different ranges, and they generally sound best in a certain range. Instead of having most of the notes for these instruments hang below or above the staff for most of the music, it makes more sense to keep those notes closer to the center, making them easier to read. Oftentimes, professionals will be given sheet music they've never seen, look it over for a few seconds, and then begin playing the piece. Music notation should be easy to read if you want to be able to do that. The treble clef is also known as the G clef. You can see that the spiral circles around the line where the G is located. The bass clef has its spiraling end where the F is. The alto clef has its indented part on the C, and so does the tenor clef. Maybe this will help you learn when the notes are a little faster. Most people learn that the spaces in the treble clef spell face, and the mnemonic all cows eat grass for the spaces in the bass clef. These are great tricks to get you started, but if you want to be able to sight read, it'll be best to learn to identify them immediately. Okay, so everything I've discussed up until now has been focused on pitched instruments, that is, instruments with definite pitch where the note is discernible. However, if you think of your standard drum set, it doesn't fall in this category. it's classified as an unpitched instrument. When you bang on a snare drum, you'll be able to tell if it's high or low pitch, but it isn't clear what notes being played, if any at all. Unpitched instruments still use a staff, although they have different meanings for the notes on them. While most instruments are notated in what's called concert pitch, there are a few instruments that'll use these clefs, but the notes the musicians play are different. These are known as transposing instruments, and they can cause quite a bit of confusion if you aren't familiar with the concept. For example, when reading music for a B-flat trumpet, if you read the note C, you're actually going to play a B-flat. If you play one of these instruments, like the B-flat trumpet, B-flat clarinet, or French horn, you'll become aware of this from your teacher or your beginner's book. Look up the notation for your specific instrument if you want to play anything I show here. As you'll discover with most of the subjects I'll be teaching, there is some nuance in these statements. Music is an art form. There are scientific ways to analyze it, traditions used to discuss it, standards to notating it, and patterns for creating it. However, these are all just methods to explain it, not strict rules to follow in order to create it. As with most forms of art, once you master the basics, you can begin to get creative with how you make it. So take what I say here as being true, but maybe not the whole truth, and understand that other, sometimes contradictory statements can also be true. To recap what we learned here, instruments and singers create notes by creating vibrations at specific frequencies. These notes are labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, with sharps and flats in between some of these notes. The way an instrument sounds is referred to as its timbre. Music is written down on a staff, and its clef defines what the written notes are. Some instruments are transposing instruments and play a different note than what is written. If you are brand new to learning about music and you didn't fully grasp it here, rewatch the video to see if it's clear the second time around. I've added timestamps in the description of the video and every other video in the series so you can go back to a specific section. If you like this lesson, be sure to like the video and ask any questions that you might have in the comment section. In the next lesson, I'll be introducing scales, some different types that exist, and how to form them.